So, made a thing. Good. All right, so plates. I'm gonna do plates, blates, and trays. What's a blate?
Yeah.
So, before I get into this, that's a really good question. So, before you, or maybe not, maybe you don't want to think about this before you give plates a try, but a blate, for example, is basically a curved plate. So if you don't like, or if you like your food to touch, or you don't mind your food to touch, a lot of times people don't mind that curved plate. Does that make sense? So in other words, it's not completely flat
Like a
on the
bowl
bottom.
plate.
Yeah,
Plate.
exactly.
Okay.
Trays usually have a straight wall, right? And it's usually taller, not always, but just depends on what you're making that tray for. And then a plate, as you guys know, is typically very flat on its surface, eating surface, right? And then the wall is either tapering out or it's close to flat and then it just kind of curves up a little bit, right? But so it's all going to depend on your preference on how you like to use plates, what you use them for, what kind of food you usually use them for, is going to help you determine how you're going to like making your plates. However, that's not always entirely true. For example, I love making mugs, but I don't like to use them very much. I know that sounds really backwards, but in other words, I don't make them very often because I don't use them very often. So this is already centered, right? Now this, depending on the size plate you want to make, is dependent on how much clay you're going to use. So for those of you, probably all of you, because you haven't been throwing very long, some of you longer than others, but you're likely not, you're going to have a hard time trying to make a dinner plate, okay? Because a dinner plate typically needs 5 to 7 pounds of clay, which is a lot more than what you're used to throwing, okay? The hardest part of doing plates or making plates is the centering. That's most of the work. Plates are the easiest thing to throw on the wheel, okay? Especially the smaller they are. Now, this is already centered. And the trick with plates is you want to center it, right? And then you slowly, you stay in cone down position. So my left, my non-dominant is on the side, it's holding tension. Because if it's too relaxed, this out here is going to get off center. It's going to start to wobble really quick. My right is continuing to push down very slowly. It's not a lot of tension and pressure because you want to keep it even and prevent it from getting off center while you continue to push that down and make it flat. Now, as that gets wider, you slowly move your right fist or your dominant fist from the center slowly to keep it level and even on the top. You slowly slide your dominant fist from the center to that outside edge. So it's very similar to coning up or bringing up your walls. You're moving slowly and you're slowly releasing that pressure because you're not trying to direct nearly as much clay, right? And if you don't release that pressure, it's going to get it uneven. If you move too fast, it's going to get uneven. So, and at one point, you can use your non-dominant hand to support your dominant so it's less likely to slip or slide. Keep it stable, and that can also create unevenness. So you're just going to slowly do several passes. Now, once you get to about 1 inch thick, now if this were, you know, a much more amount of clay, this would probably be thicker at this point, but I'm only throwing with 3 pounds of clay. So, and just like bowls, I don't know if you guys watched my video on bowls, but you need to make this thicker than what you realize. It's going to lose a lot of water as it dries. it's gonna lose even more of that thickness as it gets fired. You need to let these dry slow to prevent them from warping, 1, and cracking, that's 2. And that brings me back to throwing any type of plate, regardless of its size, regardless of what its usage, or like if it's a tray, a plate, or a blade. Doesn't matter, compression is everything. And that's another reason why you want to go slow with your dominant fist as you're slowly making this into a pancake, right? But a thick one. So you can make this thinner, not very much. You don't want to go too thin. It's better to make it thicker and have to remove a good amount of clay when you trim it than it is to make it too thin, and then it's more than likely going to warp or crack on you while it's drying, or when you're when it's firing. So compressing is in that dominant fist mostly, and then it comes to your tools when you're refining it. And you also want to compress that outside edge. So how I'm compressing this outside rim is with my thumb, like this. My right hand is on top, so I'm less likely to slip, right? Or accidentally hook my thumb into it and push it off center in the process. And my left fingers are helping my hand stay stable as well. So I'm just bringing touch up to the surface of that radius along the top. And my right hand is guiding my thumb to compress that outside edge, as well as this part of my left palm, which is right here on top of that rim, to help compress it. And then what you want to do is use a rib. Now I have all sorts of types of ribs. I have polymer, metal, and wood. You guys have the oval shaped metal rib, and you have the wood rib. I recommend you use the wood rib for this because it's stiffer than that metal rib, and that metal rib is way too rounded to help you do this. I don't recommend you use your finger to get the wall started, but you can. There's nothing wrong with that, but I feel like you're probably going to have higher chances of accidentally hooking your finger into it and pushing it off center. All this time I've had a medium wheel speed. My heel is slightly lower to the floor, so I'm not really going too fast at all. You want to dip that wooden rib into your bucket. Now you could technically use your wooden knife for this, but because it's so much longer, it's gonna be harder for you to anchor this to the wheel head, or anchor that long skinny wooden knife to the wheel head. So that's another reason why I'm using the wooden rib. But I'm holding it by the hole and I'm planting the long straight edge on the wheel so that I bring this corner up to that outside edge. And I'm holding it firmly and I'm just gently pushing it into that outside edge. Now it's gonna start making a wedge. It's gonna take off some clay. Do not reattach that, just let it fly away. Now it started to create a subtle curve and a ridge up underneath here, right? That's basically the start of my wall, okay? Now that's not much clay for me to bring up. So if you don't like a very significant wall for a plate, that's fine. I can place my hands, so my left, the muscle in my fingertip, I don't know if you guys can see it very well, let me get rid of this water. But as I used this tool to slowly guide up underneath that ledge, or create that ledge, this lift right here has a subtle curve and formed a ring right here. So that's where my left fingertip is gonna go. And my right, again, I'm bringing up my wall, I just don't have much height to it right now. So that's why it looks different. But it's the same technique, same concept. So I'm gently pushing in with my right first, actually. So it's a little bit of the opposite in that aspect. But once I start to feel my right lean into my left, I'm going to slowly add a little bit of pressure, matching that little bit of pressure with my right, and slowly bring that little bit of clay up to form a wall. Now, right now I have pretty much a formal dinner plate shape. It's flat on the bottom and I have a subtle curved wall, right, that flares out. I got a good thickness for my rim. And yes, just like the bowls, my bowl demo, you want to leave it much thicker at the bottom so that it can maintain its flatness as it's slowly drying. That's one. If it's too thin, it's going to warp, like I already mentioned. But also, you don't want to end up bringing this out too thin. It'll quickly get too floppy jalopy. So you don't, and cause it to collapse in on itself. So you want to leave this a little bit thicker, just like when you're making bowls. You want to leave more thickness at the bottom than you may realize, so that that weight can support the weight above itself. Same thing with the plate. Even though you're not going nearly as tall, it's wide. So, and the pressure point to bring up that wall is, it's mostly touch with a little bit of tension to keep your hands still and stable, and then it's the slightest amount of pressure, and then you're slowly sliding up and releasing that pressure as soon as you start to add it, pretty much. But if this were obviously much bigger, like a platter, that wall is going to be taller, more or less, or long, wider. So if I wanted this to be more like a Blate, right, I can refine that with my rib, the curved side of it, in the center, holding it firmly, add a little bit of pressure pushing down, slowly sliding it toward my wall and slowly releasing that pressure, that tiny bit of pressure, and it'll start to form a little bit more depth in the center, and therefore as you slide that rib tool towards your wall, you'll make that subtle curve on the bottom. And this will also compress your plate even more than you already have and create less chances of it cracking or warping later. But you do want to go in with your sponge, get rid of any rings you don't want, get rid of all that excess moisture so you're not creating more chances of it cracking while it's trying to dry, and follow that curve that you just made. And you can finesse that as much as you want, and this is another reason why it's better to make it a little bit thicker than you may realize, especially if you want to make this kind of curve like a Blate, so you don't accidentally make it too thin. But you also want to take into consideration how you might want to finish that plate off when you trim it, right? If you do want to have a foot, or if you just want it to be subtly concave, right? You're not going to glaze the bottom, but you don't want it to be completely flat, or maybe you do want it to be completely flat. That's up to you. But take into consideration of your thickness. And you can always use this back on the outside to refine the height and the definition of the outside of that wall. So that's a Blate. Now, if I wanted this to be more like a tray, where, you know, other things are actually stored and kept in it, rather than used for food. Or maybe it is used for food, I don't know. But you would make it flat like I did your standard dinner plate, right? And I'm just going to reinforce that bottom. That kind of made the wall collapse or fold over a little bit. I'm not worried about that. This isn't ideally how you want to make a tray, because, as I will show you, if that falls back over onto the bat and you try and lift it back up, or you try and compress it and anchor it back down to the wheel, that area is going to trap air in between the bat and your clay. Does that make sense? So it's going to start to do this. So definitely don't want to start it out this thin, but it's a good way to show you how to not do it. That was a good laugh, Sherry. I love that. He's like, gotcha. All right, so then just like using or making the blade, I'm going to use the rib to really compress this down before I do the wall. I think with the tray, because they're typically so much wider and flat, and you don't glaze the bottom, you don't trim the bottom, therefore you don't glaze it. You want to really refine the bottom first and compress it, and then use your rib. Compress that rim first though. Anchor it to the wheel, just like I did the plate earlier. Slowly direct that corner up underneath. Now, if I want it to be a shallow wall, I can continue to use that rib by anchoring the short end on the wheel so that the long straight edge stands up, and using it in place of my outside hand, my dominant, while I bring up the wall. So my non-dominant on the inside is gently pushing that clay into the rib and slowly sliding up. I don't really have pressure. I'm just gently directing that clay into the rib on the outside, and so slowly sliding my finger up to bring that clay up just a little bit. And then, but if I wanted this wall to be taller, I could slowly direct the corner of that rib tool in a little bit more. I need to be careful because this clay is starting to get overworked. It's getting really wet, and it's wanting to buckle on me. So at this point, it's mostly just touch. Refine that edge. Go over it with my sponge so I'm not using or leaving a bunch of loose water in there. Especially in this corner, because unlike the plate and the blade, I have a hard corner in there, so water is gonna want to stay there, and that's the first place it's gonna want to crack. Even if it doesn't go all the way through, it'll create that kind of stress crack, or at least want to. So, now, I do not recommend you cut your plate or your blade or your tray off the wheel right away. I do recommend you use a hard corner, whether that's your wooden knife or if you have a polymer rib like this one, because odds are your wooden rib doesn't have a hard corner like that. It's more rounded, but make a subtle ledge up underneath that little flare at the bottom, so that your wire tool easily glides up underneath there and you can cut it at, keep it level while you run your wire tool up underneath it to cut it off. Because once you do cut this off, it's nowhere nearly as wet. So you're gonna need a lot more tension in that wire tool to guide it through. And in that case, you will want your wheel head on a very slow speed, like just enough that it spins to help that wire tool work its way up underneath there. You awake? You okay?
Yeah, every time I sit down and do nothing, I have a hard time keeping my.
Got it.
It's not you. It's
No, you're
everywhere I go.
okay. You're okay. Just making sure you're okay. So did all of that make sense?
Yeah, that was great.
Cool. Are you sure? Okay.
I mean, in theory.
Rick, you look
In theory, it makes sense.
I thought you said this was easy.
They are easy.
That's a great thing.
Hey guys, a few side notes about plates to add to this demo. A few reasons why you want to make them thicker than you may realize is several reasons. One, and this is a huge one, your rib tool is going to remove a fair amount of that water and clay as you're compressing it, as well as refining it and shaping it. Okay, so that's a big one. Two, until you know your preferred thickness finished, and this is a big one, the depth of your foot. So once you make some and you start to get an idea and you start to refine how you want to make your plates, you'll get an idea of your desired thickness as well as the depth of your foot. If you do have, if you do prefer to trim a foot on the bottom of your plates, okay? So it's like I say during the demo, it's better to have too much than too little, especially with plates. Your wire tool is also going to remove a fair layer of clay when you cut it off the bat. The last few side notes with plates is you don't want to cut it immediately when you're done throwing for several reasons. One is to minimize or prevent several things. One is unevenness, therefore textures that you may not want that will also make it trickier for you to trim it later, as well as just help prevent cutting at an angle because it's so much wider where you're cutting it off the bat, as well as a jagged edge. So it's gonna prevent or minimize a jagged edge along the outside of that foot where you're inserting that wire and pulling it out from, which will also minimize trickiness with trimming, okay? This will also help prevent and minimize cracking later due to the memory of clay. So when you cut it off, there are several things. You want to wait until the plate is no longer tacky to the touch. Therefore, you want to touch it, so don't push, but just place your finger, especially in the center, that's where it's the last place to dry, so it's the wettest, and work your way towards the wall along the base. And just make sure you're not lifting any clay onto your finger. It's fine if you leave a fingerprint, but you don't want to apply pressure and try and change the shape of your, or the surface of your plate. And you're not trying to lift clay off either. So you just want to make sure it's not, it doesn't look shiny and it's not tacky. It doesn't feel tacky. That's when you know it's still soft and easy for you to run that wire tool up underneath it and cut it off, but you're less likely to create any warping while you're pulling that wire tool, which will create more memory in that clay later on as it continues to get handled, from when you take it off the bat, when you cover it up, when you handle it, flip it over, trim it, so on and so forth. It goes through firings. That memory is not limited to when you're throwing. It runs all the way through the firings, okay? So plates are the first thing that's gonna wanna crack on you, okay? So you wanna take them slow, and you wanna take them easy, and you wanna be gentle with them. Especially because of that memory, to minimize any cracks. So when you do run the wire tool up underneath there, you do want to put it back on the wheel. Make sure your bat is fully anchored. It's not a little off. And you want to just barely turn your wheel back on enough that it spins. No faster than that. You want to keep it really slow. And you want to hold your wire tool nice and tight with some good amount of tension, so you're less likely to slip or snag or accidentally lift too soon and create that foot unevenly, all right, or snag it, which can make it tricky for you to trim, all right? So you do also want to allow your pieces, your plates, to set up on a porous, flush or flat surface. That also goes back to that memory. The more you handle it, the more likely it's going to warp or crack, because you're pushing and pulling and you're playing around with that tension and the physics of the clay. So let it set up on a drywall or sheetrock or wood, a porous surface, to help it dry evenly and slow. Plastic keeps it wet, okay? So that will help also prevent cracking later on. And when you are done trimming, even if you put them back to get fired, you want to just lightly drape a plastic sheet over it. Even if it's got a little bit of air in there, you don't need to tightly wrap it, but you want to let them dry slow to also help prevent cracking, okay? Especially this time of year, we're hot, it's dry. That, and like I said during your demonstrations last week, the rim is the first thing to dry. The foot is the last thing to dry. Especially the wider your foot is, the longer it takes to dry, because the center of that foot is the last place it's more than likely going to dry, if not the outside of your foot, because that's typically at least an even thickness with your wall and your foot, or it's thicker, a little bit thicker. So you want to be really mindful when it comes to plates. They may be easy to throw, but they're really easy to mess them up. Okay, so take it slow. I hope that was helpful. I hope you enjoyed it. And let me know if you have any questions. I'll see you soon.